the nuclear-powered cruise missile. In 1957, deep within the Nevada desert at the Atomic Energy Commission's testing grounds, scientists began work on one of the most terrifying weapons concepts of the Cold War. Project Pluto aimed to create a cruise missile powered by an unshielded nuclear reactor that could fly at treetop level at speeds exceeding Mach 3, delivering multiple nuclear warheads while irradiating everything in its path. The concept was audacious, a weapon that would be as deadly during its flight as at the moment of impact. Engineers at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory envisioned a ramjet engine where incoming air would be heated by a nuclear reactor core running at temperatures exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, providing virtually unlimited range. The missile, designated SLAM, supersonic low-altitude missile, would stay airborne for weeks or even months, loitering over enemy territory before striking its final targets. The design called for a missile that could carry up to 16 thermonuclear warheads, striking multiple cities in a single mission. 2 reactor prototypes were actually built and successfully tested. Tori 2A was tested in May 1961 at the Nuclear Rocket Development Station in Nevada, operating at full power for several minutes without incident. The more advanced Tori 2C ran for 5 minutes at full thrust in June 1964, generating 60 million watts of power and proving the technology was entirely viable. But the weapon's success became its downfall. Military planners realized SLAM was too devastating even by Cold War standards. The missile would spread lethal radiation across vast areas during its low-altitude flight, contaminating thousands of square miles of territory. Its sonic boom traveling at treetop level would shatter windows, damage structures, and injure people below. The unshielded reactor made the weapon almost as dangerous to friendly forces as to the enemy. Pilots and ground crews would require extensive shielding just to service the missiles. Additionally, the rapid development of intercontinental ballistic missiles had made the concept strategically obsolete before it could be deployed. Project Pluto was cancelled in July 1964. The reactors were buried at the test site in sealed containers. All documentation was immediately classified at the highest levels. Engineers who worked on the project were reassigned to other nuclear programs and required to sign additional secrecy agreements. The testing facilities were systematically decommissioned and sealed. The test site remains contaminated to this day, a radioactive monument to a weapon that worked exactly as designed, which was precisely why it could never be used. The Lunar Military Base. In March 1959, the United States Army presented a classified proposal to establish a permanent military installation on the Moon by 1966. Project Horizon called for a fortified lunar base staffed by 12 soldiers, equipped with nuclear weapons, designed to give America the ultimate military high ground in the Cold War. The proposal was not science fiction. It was a serious military planning document complete with engineering specifications, cost projections, and deployment timelines. The proposal emerged from deep paranoia about Soviet space intentions. After Sputnik shocked America in October 1957, military planners feared the Soviets would weaponize space and claim the Moon before the United States could respond. The Army's response was comprehensive, a detailed 400-page study outlining how to build, supply, and defend a lunar military outpost using existing or near-term technology. The study projected that construction could begin as early as 1964, with the base operational by November 1966. Project Horizon planned to use a series of Saturn rocket launches to deliver prefabricated cylindrical modules, nuclear power generators, life support systems, and weapons to the lunar surface. The base would be partially buried in lunar regolith for protection against radiation and micrometeorite impacts. Flexible solar panels and a small compact nuclear reactor would provide continuous power. The initial garrison of 12 personnel would gradually expand as additional modules arrived, working toward establishing a self-sufficient military presence of 20 to 30 personnel by 1969. The most controversial element was weaponization. The base would include modified Claymore mines for perimeter defense against potential Soviet incursions, reconnaissance satellites that could be launched from the lunar surface, and nuclear weapons capable of targeting Earth or destroying Soviet spacecraft approaching the Moon. But reality intervened quickly. The estimated cost was $6 billion in 1959 money, equivalent to over $50 billion today, an enormous sum even by Cold War standards. President Eisenhower remained deeply skeptical of militarizing space, viewing it as escalatory and potentially destabilizing. NASA, newly created in 1958, strongly opposed Army control of space activities and successfully lobbied for civilian control. Most decisively, the Outer Space Treaty signed in 1967 explicitly banned military installations on celestial bodies. Project Horizon was quietly shelved by 1960. All documents remained classified for over 3 decades. The engineers and military officers involved were transferred to other programs, with many eventually contributing to the civilian Apollo missions. The ambitious vision of armed soldiers defending a lunar fortress faded into classified archives, revealing how seriously Cold War planners took space militarization, and how close they came to bringing terrestrial warfare to the moon. The portable nuclear weapon. In 1961, the United States Army deployed what remains the smallest nuclear weapon ever built for combat use. The M28 Davy Crockett weapon system could be operated by a 3-man crew and fired from a recoilless rifle mounted on a jeep or tripod. It represented the terrifying endpoint of tactical nuclear weapons development, a nuke that could be carried and fired by infantry soldiers. Development began in the late 1950s at Los Alamos National Laboratory under codename Project Tadpole. Scientists miniaturized nuclear warheads to the smallest size physically possible while maintaining battlefield effectiveness. The result was the W-54 warhead, weighing just 51 pounds, with variable yield from 10 tons to 1 kiloton. The delivery system was equally innovative. Engineers adapted recoilless rifle technology, creating 2 versions: the M28 with 1.25 mile range, and the M29 with 2.5 mile range. The weapon could be set up and fired in minutes. Over 2,000 units were manufactured and deployed to Army units in West Germany and South Korea. But capabilities revealed horrifying flaws. Maximum range was barely beyond the lethal radiation radius. Crews firing the weapon would be exposed to significant radiation. Accuracy was poor, the projectile often missed by hundreds of yards. Most troubling, putting nuclear weapons in hands of junior officers risked accidental nuclear war from battlefield decisions. Field commanders realized the Davy Crockett was almost unusable. Training exercises demonstrated firing would likely kill friendly forces. The weapon violated emerging arms control agreements. Improved conventional weapons made tactical nukes less necessary. Production ceased in 1963. All units were withdrawn by 1971. Warheads were dismantled, launchers destroyed or placed in museums. No Davy Crockett was ever fired in combat, standing as proof the nuclear arms race had reached a point where weapons were built simply because they could be. The orbital copper needle belt. In May 1963, the United States Air Force launched millions of tiny copper needles into orbit around Earth, creating an artificial ring designed to ensure global military communications even if Soviets destroyed ground stations and satellites. Project Westford represented one of the most ambitious attempts to weaponize near-Earth space through physics rather than explosives. The concept originated at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory in the late 1950s. Scientists realized that a sufficiently dense cloud of conductive dipoles in orbit could reflect radio signals, creating a communications network that couldn't be jammed or destroyed. Each copper needle measured 0.7 inches long and 0.001 inches in diameter, thin as a human hair. 430 million needles would create a reflective belt around the planet. The first launch in 1961 failed when needles clumped together. The May 1963 launch succeeded. A canister aboard a satellite released copper needles that spread into a thin orbital band. Military tests confirmed the system worked. Radio signals successfully bounced off the needle cloud and were received thousands of miles away. The international scientific community reacted with outrage. Astronomers protested that reflective needles would interfere with telescopes, polluting space and hindering astronomical research. The Soviet Union condemned it as environmental vandalism and space militarization. Even American scientists questioned altering Earth's orbital environment for military advantage. Behind the scenes, the Air Force had already decided Westford was obsolete. Communication satellites had advanced faster than expected. The system couldn't be updated or maintained. International pressure was mounting against space pollution. The program was canceled in 1963 after just 2 launches. Military planners quietly admitted the technology was a dead end. Most needles eventually burned up in atmosphere. Some remain in orbit today. The project highlighted how Cold War desperation drove militaries to consider fundamentally altering space environment, and how quickly such ideas became technological embarrassments. The Congressional Bunker. Beneath the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia, a luxury hotel catering to presidents and celebrities, the United States government secretly built one of the most elaborate bunkers of the Cold War. For 3 decades, from 1961 to 1992, this massive underground facility stood ready to shelter the entire United States Congress in the event of nuclear war, complete with dormitories, meeting halls, and decontamination chambers. The project began in 1958 when the Eisenhower administration identified a critical vulnerability. Washington, D.C. could be destroyed by a single Soviet nuclear missile, decapitating the government. The solution was emergency relocation facilities far from the capital. The Greenbrier, already popular with politicians, offered perfect cover for construction. Engineers excavated 112,000 square feet of underground space, disguising work as a new hotel wing. Massive blast doors, concealed behind false walls, protected chambers housing 440 members of Congress and 800 staff for 60 days. The facility included an entire underground chamber built to serve as the House of Representatives, complete with desks, sound systems, and podium. Dormitories held bunk beds labeled by state delegation. Industrial kitchens, medical facilities, and communication centers filled additional chambers. The bunker was maintained in constant readiness by secret staff posing as audiovisual technicians. Equipment was regularly tested and updated. Supplies were rotated. Access protocols were refined. Evacuation drills were conducted in secret. The facility cost hundreds of millions of dollars over its operational lifetime, paid through black budget appropriations. But the bunker's secrecy ended in May 1992 when a Washington Post investigation revealed its existence. Once exposed, the facility lost strategic value. Congress could no longer use it if Soviets knew its location. The facility was officially decommissioned later that year. Today, the bunker operates as a museum offering tours of the Cold War relic, serving as a monument to an era when even the most powerful democracy prepared to continue governing from beneath a resort hotel. The first anti-ballistic missile system. In 1959, at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, the United States Army achieved what many physicists thought impossible, successfully intercepting and destroying a ballistic missile in flight using another missile. The Nike Zeus system represented the first serious attempt to create a shield against nuclear attack, sparking a technological arms race that would define Cold War defense policy. Development began in 1956 when Army planners realized Soviet ICBMs would soon make American cities vulnerable to nuclear attack with virtually no warning. The Nike Zeus concept called for high-speed interceptor missiles equipped with nuclear warheads that could destroy incoming Soviet missiles before reaching targets. Bell Labs and Douglas Aircraft were contracted to develop radar systems and missiles. The technical challenges were immense. Incoming ICBMs traveled at 15,000 miles per hour. Detection and tracking systems had to spot the missile, calculate trajectory, launch an interceptor, and guide it to impact, all within minutes. The interceptor had to accelerate fast enough to reach incoming warhead altitude and detonate close enough to destroy it. By 1962, the system had achieved multiple successful intercepts during testing. Large phased-array radars could detect launches from thousands of miles away. Nike Zeus missiles successfully destroyed target warheads. The technology worked. Military planners began identifying cities for protection and designing defensive perimeters around major population centers. But success revealed deeper problems. The system could be overwhelmed by multiple incoming missiles. Soviet countermeasures, decoys, and chaff could confuse radars. Each defensive installation cost hundreds of millions of dollars yet could be defeated by adding more offensive missiles at a fraction of the cost. Most troubling, the system's nuclear-tipped interceptors would detonate over American territory, creating radioactive fallout even in successful engagement. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara canceled the program in 1963, calling it technically obsolete before deployment. Installations were never built. Missiles were scrapped. Engineers were reassigned to more advanced Nike X program. Yet Nike Zeus proved ballistic missile defense was possible, establishing principles guiding research through Strategic Defense Initiative into modern missile defense systems still deployed today. The dirty bomb tests. In April 1957, in a remote section of the Nevada test site, the United States Atomic Energy Commission deliberately detonated conventional explosives mixed with radioactive material to study how effectively such weapons could contaminate enemy territory. These tests, designated Project 57 and conducted with utmost secrecy, represented America's research into radiological weapons, dirty bombs, designed to deny territory to enemy forces through radiation rather than explosive force. The impetus came from military planners exploring every conceivable weapon type. If nuclear weapons could destroy cities, perhaps radioactive dispersal devices could create uninhabitable zones, denying Soviets access to strategic locations without diplomatic consequences of using actual nuclear weapons. The tests would determine how effectively radioactive materials could be spread and how long contamination would persist. For separate tests dispersed plutonium, uranium, and other radioactive materials across the desert. Engineers measured contamination patterns, tested decontamination methods, and studied how radiation levels changed over time. Soldiers in protective gear entered contaminated zones to assess habitability and measure exposure. Data collected was immediately classified at highest levels. Results were both promising and disturbing from military perspective. Radioactive dispersal was highly effective. Small amounts of material could contaminate large areas. Decontamination was difficult and time-consuming. Personnel operating in contaminated zones required extensive protection. But weapons also had severe limitations. They couldn't create instant devastation of nuclear weapons. Winds could blow contamination unpredictably, and international law was murky on radiological weapons legality. Within months, military planners concluded radiological weapons offered few advantages over conventional or nuclear options. Weapons were too indiscriminate, too dependent on weather, too likely to provoke international condemnation. Psychological impact, the main advantage, could be achieved through threats without actual deployment. Project 57 was quietly terminated. Test areas were fenced off and marked with radiation warnings. Contamination from the tests persists today. Documents remained classified for decades. Few participants who discussed tests described them as the weapons we built to prove we shouldn't build them. The program demonstrated some military capabilities, even when technically feasible, cross ethical and practical boundaries making deployment unthinkable. Airborne Nuclear Alert. From 1960 to 1968, American B-52 bombers loaded with live nuclear weapons flew continuous patrols over the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, ready to strike the Soviet Union at a moment's notice. Operation Chrome Dome represented the most aggressive nuclear posture the United States ever adopted, keeping dozens of nuclear-armed aircraft in the air 24 hours a day, every day, for 8 years straight. The operation began as response to Soviet ICBM development. Military planners feared Soviet first strike could destroy America's ground-based bombers before they could launch, eliminating a crucial leg of the nuclear triad. The solution was keeping a portion of the bomber force permanently airborne, beyond reach of Soviet missiles, capable of retaliating even if every American base was destroyed. At the program's peak, 12 B-52s carrying multiple thermonuclear weapons were airborne at all times, following precisely planned routes that kept them within striking distance of Soviet targets. Each bomber carried between 2 and 4 hydrogen bombs, each with explosive yields measured in megatons. Refueling aircraft met bombers mid-flight, extending patrol time. Crews rotated through missions lasting 24 hours or more. The operation achieved its strategic goal. Soviets knew destroying America's ground forces wouldn't prevent devastating retaliation. But the policy created terrifying risks. Mechanical failures, human errors, and accidents were inevitable when flying hundreds of nuclear-armed missions monthly. The most serious incident occurred in January 1968, when a B-52 crashed near Thule Air Base in Greenland, spreading plutonium across ice. Only luck prevented nuclear detonation. Following the Thule crash, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara ordered Chrome Dome ended. Risks outweighed benefits. Submarine-launched missiles had become reliable enough to guarantee second strike capability without airborne bombers. The last Chrome Dome flight landed on January 28, 1968. The program's legacy includes for major nuclear weapons accidents, several crew deaths, radioactive contamination at crash sites, and recognition that maintaining nuclear-armed aircraft in constant flight was simply too dangerous. Chrome Dome demonstrated Cold War deterrence sometimes required accepting catastrophic risks, until those risks became unbearable. The Soviet doomsday machine. In the mid-1980s, deep within Soviet strategic rocket forces, engineers completed work on a system so terrifying that its mere existence was kept secret for decades. Officially designated Perimeter but known colloquially as Dead Hand, the system was designed to automatically launch a massive nuclear counterattack against the West even if Soviet leadership was dead and Moscow was destroyed, a doomsday machine guaranteeing mutual destruction. The system emerged from Soviet paranoia about American first strike capabilities. Soviet military planners feared improved American missiles and targeting could potentially destroy Soviet leadership and command centers before retaliation could be ordered. Dead Hand was designed to solve this problem by removing human decision-making from nuclear retaliation. The system consisted of a network of sensors monitoring for nuclear detonations, seismic shocks, radiation levels, and communication blackouts. If sensors detected signs of nuclear attack and the system couldn't contact Soviet leadership, it would automatically transfer launch authority to a hardened underground command post staffed by junior officers. These officers, if they confirmed leadership was gone and the country was under attack, could activate special command missiles that would fly over Soviet ICBM fields broadcasting launch codes, triggering full-scale retaliatory strike, all without requiring authorization from surviving political or military leadership. The system became operational in 1985. Its existence was suspected but not confirmed until mid-1990s when Russian officials finally acknowledged its creation. Details were chilling. Dead Hand was designed to function even if all major Soviet cities were destroyed, all leadership dead, and all communication systems severed. It represented the ultimate in automated warfare, a machine programmed to end civilization. Western analysts debated whether Dead Hand made nuclear war more or less likely. Supporters argued it enhanced deterrence by guaranteeing retaliation. Critics countered it removed human judgment from the most consequential decision imaginable, creating risks of accidental nuclear war from sensor malfunctions or miscalculations. According to recent Russian statements, modified versions of Dead Hand remain operational today, guaranteeing no first strike could prevent Russian nuclear retaliation. The nuclear missile city under Greenland's ice. In 1959, American engineers began tunneling beneath Greenland's ice sheet, telling Danish authorities they were building a scientific research station called Camp Century. The real objective, classified as Project Iceworm, was far more ambitious. Construct a vast network of tunnels housing 600 medium-range nuclear missiles positioned to strike the Soviet Union from beneath Arctic ice. A hidden nuclear city that would be virtually undetectable and impossible to destroy. The public face of Camp Century was impressive. Engineers carved an entire underground base from ice, including living quarters, laboratories, a chapel, and recreational facilities for 200 personnel. A portable nuclear reactor provided power and heat. Tunnels extended for miles beneath ice. The facility showcased American engineering prowess in the harshest environment on Earth. But the classified mission was vastly larger. Plans called for 4,000 miles of tunnels crisscrossing northwestern Greenland, housing 600 Iceman missiles in individual silos carved from solid ice. Launch facilities would be hidden beneath hundreds of feet of ice, making them invisible to Soviet surveillance and impervious to first strike attacks. Support infrastructure would include underground railways, command centers, and facilities for thousands of military personnel. The technical challenges proved insurmountable. The ice sheet moved and deformed faster than engineers expected. Tunnels required constant maintenance as ice compressed and shifted. The nuclear reactor created heat that destabilized surrounding ice. Logistics of rotating 600 missiles and maintaining them in sub-zero conditions beneath moving ice were beyond available technology. Most critically, the political foundation collapsed. Denmark, which controlled Greenland, had not been informed of the true purpose. When hints of the nuclear mission leaked in mid-1960s, Danish officials demanded explanations. Americans couldn't reveal Project Iceworm without causing diplomatic crisis. And improved ICBM technology had made medium-range missiles obsolete. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967. The nuclear reactor was removed, but supplies and infrastructure were left behind, now buried under ever-accumulating ice. Tunnels collapsed. Project Iceworm was cancelled and classified. Denmark didn't learn the full truth until documents were declassified decades later. These 10 weapons programs represent more than technological achievements or military failures. They reveal the extraordinary lengths to which Cold War superpowers went in pursuit of strategic advantage, often pushing technology to and beyond reasonable limits. Nuclear-powered missiles that spread radiation, lunar military bases, portable nukes, orbital needle clouds, congressional bunkers, missile defense systems, dirty bomb tests, nuclear-armed patrols, automatic doomsday machines, and ice-buried missile cities. Each program seemed logical within the paranoid calculus of mutual assured destruction. What unites these programs is a pattern of ambition followed by recognition of fundamental flaws. Technologies worked as designed but revealed unacceptable strategic, political, or ethical consequences. Projects were cancelled not because they failed technically, but because success highlighted dangers that outweighed benefits. The weapons were too indiscriminate, too destabilizing, too likely to trigger the very wars they were meant to prevent, or too dependent on assumptions that proved false. Many programs remained classified for decades. Their existence revealed only after the Cold War ended and documents were declassified. Engineers and scientists involved were sworn to secrecy, their work hidden from public scrutiny and democratic oversight. This secrecy allowed development of weapons that might never have been approved if openly debated, highlighting tensions between national security and democratic accountability that persist today. The legacy of these programs shapes current defense policy. Ballistic missile defense descended from Nike Zeus. Nuclear posture evolved from Chrome Dome's lessons. Arms control treaties emerged partly from recognition that weapons like the Davy Crockett made nuclear war too likely. Modern military planners still grapple with questions these programs raised. When does a weapon's effectiveness make it too dangerous to use? How much destructive power is enough? Can technology solve strategic problems, or does it sometimes create worse ones? These weren't fantasy weapons or conspiracy theories. They were real programs, documented in declassified files, built by real engineers and funded through verifiable budgets. They represent a period when two superpowers, locked in ideological conflict, pursued every conceivable military advantage, regardless of cost or consequence. The fact that most were never used and many were cancelled despite working exactly as intended suggests that even in the darkest period of the Cold War, some boundaries of acceptable warfare still held, barely. The programs serve as reminders that technological capability does not equal strategic wisdom, and that some doors, once opened, reveal futures too terrible to pursue.